what is community? We're immediately jumping into talking about, building community and mobilizing community, but we really haven't talked about what is community. And to get personal about it too and think about ourselves. I think it's impossible to be a community builder unless you're also a community member. So many places I go and people talk, we're going to build community, and I ask them, what's your community? And how are you involved in your community? And they don't have one. And it's like it's good for everybody else, but I don't have time for it. I'm too busy building community, right? And people have lots of different notions of community, and there's no one right definition, but I thought it might be helpful just to do a little conversation about what is community. What does it mean to you, first of all? It's the Inclusion Press, right? Jack Pierpoint did a whole thing on sort of circles of relationships, which is just what you described. There's that inner circle of intimate relationships, circles of really good friends, people you can just count on all the time, circles of participation, people you just bump into on a regular basis because they're in your neighborhood, in your workplace, place of worship, whatever. And then there's, he talks about the circles of economic exchange, or people you have some relationship with because you do business with them or you get services from them. Yeah, great. That's what I've heard that one too. It's the sharing of gifts among one another. Is about gift exchange is one idea of community. That's great. Yeah, good. Yeah, so there's lots of different kinds of communities, right? There's communities of interest, there's communities of place, right? Well, I heard common elements, it's about relationships, and I think that's really important. That oftentimes we talk about community as the place where we're at, and we can have a place, a really nice neighborhood, and not have a community. Does that make sense? And we can also have a community, and there are a lot of people who aren't in a place and have a strong sense of community, and there are a lot of individuals who don't feel connected to that community, who feel isolated. So I'd like to think about it as a group of people who identify with one another, as you said, have common interests, have common identity. It might be a place, it might be an interest, it might be a club, some kind of common interest, shared class, but also people who are supporting one another, not just in a neighborhood, not saying I'm part of this place, but also there's a relationship there, the support, the challenge, people interacting with one another. Is community in itself a good? Is it inherently good? Depends. We say our goal is to build community, and if we build community, have we done something good? There are communities of white racists called Nazis, right? And there's communities that are called gangs. So what makes for a good community? So what I'm hearing is a key for community is to build inclusive communities that really value everybody's gifts and
open doors.
Yeah.
Fully open to
right.
everybody.
One of the things that's interesting, people talk about having multiple communities, and I think that's true. I think it's changed over time. That it used to be we live, learn, work, play all in the same place. And in many, so we have these circles of relationships where we bump, we're all the same circles. And now we've got all kinds of circles. We've got all different kinds of communities. In a sense, we have no community at all because we don't bump into the same people over and over. Our lives are so dispersed. We're in so many different arenas. We might go one place to shop, and we go another place to work, and we go another place to school, and we're always moving. So what's the value of, and we talked about, social media communities, we talked about workplace. What's the value, people here are primarily focusing on place. What's the unique value of a place-based community? To me, one of the keys about the place-based is that's the potential for more of the diversity to come together to create more inclusive spaces. That a lot of our other communities are created around communities of interest where people kind of self-select, so you get all one kind of people in the workplace, one kind of people in a church, one kind of people in a youth program, one kind of people in, increasingly our communities are becoming less diverse, but at least you have the diversity oftentimes of age, of people from different kinds of backgrounds, different religions, different So it's an opportunity to create a little bit more inclusivity than you get in most other kinds of communities. I think many communities are. I think you're becoming increasingly spatially separated between the rich and the poor. But I find other communities, like faith-based communities tend to be one, there's, in Seattle, we have the African American Baptist Church, and we have the Jewish synagogue, and we've got the Buddhist temple, and we've got the German Lutheran Church. But in my neighborhood, everybody's there, right? No, and I think that's the point, is you get the much more diversity in a place-based community than you would in other kinds of communities of interest, right? So it's the opportunity to kind of create that good community that people have been talking about. But there's lots of challenges to that these days. And what are some of the ingredients, as you're sharing your stories, that make for strong communities? What helps build community? Yeah, they say in many neighborhoods the biggest thing breaking down community is just fear. People living behind closed doors, and whether or not they have a reason to be afraid, they're behind closed doors, and the more they don't know each other, the more fearful they become. Yeah, isn't that right? Crisis really is a great way to build community. Yeah, you get earthquakes, floods, fires. It builds community. Yeah. It's kind of like death, right? You get the right people die. Yeah. When I was doing community organizing, I was always looking for the crisis because it was like because it's easy to mobilize people around an issue or around a crisis. And if there wasn't a crisis, I was pretty depressed. It's like, so I think one of the strengths of this approach of asset-based is it's also a way to bring people together in the absence of a crisis and to get more people engaged. So when it comes time for the crisis, you're more resilient. When it comes time to fight for social justice, you've got a louder voice because you've really built broad, inclusive engagement. What else? I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about all this, but just the unique powers of community. That, we need to fight for justice, make sure people's rights are being maintained, but there are also some things the state can't do so well for us, like raise our kids, right? So it's about sort of what's the unique role of community. And it drives me crazy when people are complaining to government about the youth problem. It's like, whose kids are they? What are some other things that make for a community? Eric Kleinenberg, he's a sociologist in Chicago, wrote about the heat wave in Chicago that hit 15 years ago or so. And it's one of those crises that was sort of silent. It was not visible. It's not like an earthquake or a tornado. No visible damage, but 700 people died in that heat wave because it's just oppressively hot. And did a study of 2 neighborhoods in Chicago that were identical neighborhoods. Physically, they looked the same demographics. But one neighborhood had a death rate that was 10 times higher than the other, simply because in one neighborhood people were connected, in the other one they weren't. And people didn't even know who to look for. They didn't know so-and-so needed help because they didn't know the person. But so that's, the whole idea about you can have a place and still not have a community. You can have a neighborhood and not have a community. I think in this particular case, it was that there were more social activities happening. I think another key ingredient is having some bumping places. I like to call them bumping places, community gathering places. I think communities, we talked about, is about relationships. And the more you bump into the same people over and over again, see those same faces over and over again, the more you build relationships. And that's what community is all about. And so if you want to build community, you need bumping places. And the closer the bumping places are to where you live, the more likely you are to bump into the same people over and over again. So the one neighborhood had a more vibrant business district. And that's a great bumping place, a neighborhood, Main Street, with a pub and grocery store, places where you bump into the same places. And increasingly we're designing our places to be anti-bumping. We got bedroom communities where people just go to sleep, right? And they're just designed for cars. So people don't interact. They're designed. It's hard to interact, and where people go to to the mall to shop, and you don't bump into your neighbors anymore because the malls serve a huge area, so you don't bump into the same people over and over again. So having those bumping places is absolutely critical, and I think it's an important thing to think about in your community outreach and your community building. Is the principle about going where people are. Knocking on doors is one way to do it. Another is to just identify where are those key bumping places and hang out there and get to know people and see where people are interacting, particularly identifying the bumping places of the people who are underrepresented in your community work. Where do the young people hang out? Where do the new immigrants hang out? You know, where are those key bumping places? And thinking about how you can help create some bumping places in your community, even places that are designed to be anti-bumping. People have done really creative things like create little free libraries in their front yard, or create mobile tea shops, or people really gravitate to those bumping places, community gardens. So we didn't talk about probably the key ingredients to building community, and that's food. So let's have food. Food is a key community builder. So let's have, I mean, really, food, fun, parties. That's the key to community. That's key ingredient. So I put together a little diagram showing a couple different ways to address about the differences between service delivery and community building. And differences being that service delivery is led by agencies. Community building involves associations. So that's more organizing, and it's about building on community strengths. In service delivery, you have different groups of people. You have professionals,